In the summer of 1958, Ferrari had 3 drivers fighting for the same championship. By January of 1959, all 3 of them were dead, not from one crash, not from one race. 3 separate deaths in 3 separate countries across 7 months, and every single one of them was chasing something when it happened. One of them was chasing his teammate for a corner he'd taken flat out the year before. One of them was chasing a van wall he had no real chance of catching, and the third one, the one who survived both of them, was chasing a gray Mercedes down a wet road in England for no reason at all, 3 months after he'd already retired from the sport that was supposed to kill him. This is a story about a team, not a track. About what a championship does to 3 men who are supposed to be teammates and are actually rivals wearing the same red overalls. Formula 1 in 1958 had no seatbelts, no roll bars worth the name, and cars that weighed less than a modern family hatchback carrying 2.5 liters of fuel behind the driver's spine. A crash didn't need to be dramatic to be fatal. It just needed a ditch, or a tree, or a piece of hay bale in the wrong place, and enough speed to turn a car into a catapult. Every driver on the grid knew this. It's why so many of them talk in old interviews with a kind of resigned calm about death that sounds almost rehearsed. They weren't brave because they didn't understand the risk. They were brave because understanding it and racing anyway was the whole job. 3 men wore red that year. An Italian who needed the prize money more than he needed the glory. An Englishman, Enzo Ferrari, was treated like a son. And another Englishman who would win the world championship without ever really wanting to talk about how. This isn't a tribute video. All 3 of these men were extraordinary drivers, and that was never in question. What's worth asking is a harder thing what a team does to itself when 3 drivers are fighting each other for the same seat, the same prize money, and the same one championship, inside cars that gave them almost no room for error to begin with. By 1958, Luigi Musso was Ferrari's leading Italian driver, and he needed to be. He came from money, but by his final season, he was deep in debt-bad card games, an expensive life, a fortune that hadn't lasted. The French Grand Prix at Reims carried the largest prize purse of the year. For Musso, winning it wasn't about the championship, it was about the money. His 2 teammates didn't have that problem, and that was part of what made the arrangement between them so lopsided. Mike Hawthorn and Peter Collins were both English, both close friends off the track, and according to Musso's own girlfriend, speaking decades later in a documentary, they had a private agreement. Whichever of the 2 of them won a race, they'd split the winnings between them. Musso wasn't part of that arrangement. It was the 2 of them against him, inside the same team, wearing the same colors. Fiamma Bresci, who was with Musso at the time of his death, said the rivalry wasn't damaging to Ferrari. It was useful. The angrier the 3 of them got at each other, the faster they all drove, and the more often a Ferrari crossed the line first. Nobody inside the team had much incentive to calm it down. That's the context for what happened next. Not 3 separate accidents. One team, structured in a way that rewarded exactly the kind of risk that was about to kill 2 of them within 4 weeks. July the 6th, 1958, the French Grand Prix at Reims. Hawthorne on pole, Musso starting second beside him. Hawthorne got away clean and built a lead. By lap 2, Musso had moved up into second, and for the next 7 laps he did the only thing that made sense to a man who needed that prize money more than he needed to finish the season in one piece. He chased. Lap after lap, closing the gap on his own teammate, right up until he was almost on Hawthorne's tail. There was one corner at Reims the Courbe de Calvaire, a fast curve out near Mouillezon that Musso had been able to take completely flat out the year before in a slower car. In 1958, Ferrari had given him more power than the car underneath him could really handle through that same corner at the same speed. On lap 9, clipping a curb at roughly 240 kilometers an hour, Musso's Ferrari snapped left. It went into a ditch at the side of the track and somersaulted into a wheat field beyond it. He was thrown from the car. A helicopter took him to hospital in Reims, where he died that evening from head and internal injuries. He was 33 years old. The race continued. Hawthorne won it. After Musso, the race continued. Hawthorne won it. After Collins, the race continued too. Brooks won that one. After Lewis-Evans, the championship was decided anyway. After Hawthorne, there was no race left to continue. He'd already retired from all of them. 4 weeks later. The Nürburgring the Nordschleife, 22 kilometers of blind crests and forest, widely considered the most dangerous circuit any of them raced on that year. Peter Collins had just had the best race of his career. 2 weeks earlier at Silverstone, he'd driven flat out for 45 laps in an inferior car to hold off Stirling Moss's Vanwall and win the British Grand Prix, a drive so aggressive that one rival driver told him afterward it had frightened him to watch. Ferrari's management could have told him to back off after that. They didn't. They let him keep driving exactly that way. At the Nürburgring, Collins was chasing Tony Brooks's Vanwall through a section of the circuit called Flansgarten, one of the most feared parts of the whole track. On lap 11, his Ferrari ran wide. It caught a ditch at the edge of the track. The car flipped into the air, landed upside down, and threw Collins clear. He struck a tree. He was carried to a hospital in Bonn with critical head injuries. He died there later that same afternoon. He was 26 years old. Here's the detail that should stop you. A ditch, a flip, a head injury. Almost exactly what had killed Musso 4 weeks earlier at a different circuit in a different country. Two Ferrari teammates dead within a month of each other from what was essentially the same accident. Enzo Ferrari, writing about Collins afterward, said losing him felt like losing a son for the second time his own son Dino had died 2 years earlier. It wasn't just sentiment. Collins really had become close to him in a way Musso, competing for the same seat, never quite managed. The race continued too. Brooks won that one. Two teammates. 4 weeks apart, both chasing someone else's car when they died. If you're watching this and thinking Mike Hawthorn must have been shattered by this point, you'd be right. What happens next is the part most people get wrong. They assume Hawthorn won the championship and walked away clean. He didn't walk away clean. He just walked away last. By the last race of the season, Hawthorn had one job left: beat Stirling Moss's Vanwall to the World Championship by finishing high enough regardless of who actually won the race. He didn't need to win it outright, and by this point in the season, after burying two teammates, he wasn't racing like a man chasing glory. He drove a conservative race, stayed ahead of the other Vanwalls, and let Ferrari teammate Phil Hill wave him through into second place late in the race, exactly enough points to take the title by a single point over Moss. Mike Hawthorn became the first British driver ever to win the Formula One World Championship. It should have been the best day of his career. It wasn't, because of what had happened 41 laps earlier to the third Vanwall on the grid. Stuart Lewis-Evans was 28, the youngest of Vanwall's three drivers, and by every account, the most naturally gifted of the three. On lap 41, his engine seized mid-corner. The car speared into the barriers at high speed and burst into flames. He got himself out of the burning cockpit. His overalls were already alight. Vanwall's owner, Tony Vandervelde, chartered a private plane and flew him back to England that same night to a specialist burns unit in East Grinstead that had treated pilots during the war. There was nothing they could do. He died 6 days later. He was 28. Hawthorn won the World Championship and Lewis-Evans died in the same race weekend. Vandervelde was reportedly so affected by it that it contributed to him pulling Vanwall out of Formula One altogether at the end of the season, the team that had just won its only Constructors' Championship. 2 days after Lewis-Evans died, Hawthorn announced his retirement from motor racing. He was 29 years old, the reigning world champion, and he wanted nothing more to do with any of it. He'd lost two teammates to crashes that killed them outright. He'd just watched a third driver die slowly over 6 days from burns. Whatever winning a world championship was supposed to feel like, by October of 1958, it clearly didn't feel like that anymore. The championship was decided anyway, 3 months into retirement. Mike Hawthorn was running the family garage business in Farnham and living, by most accounts, a quieter life than the one that had just made him famous. On the morning of January the 22nd, 1959, he was driving to a lunch in London along the Hog's Back toward Guildford in his own heavily modified Jaguar saloon. Rob Walker, a friend, and a team owner in the sport Hawthorn had just left passed him going the other way in a Mercedes and gave him a good-natured wave. It was enough. Hawthorn pulled out and chased him. Two men in fast cars on a wet road for no reason except that one of them had just been the fastest driver in the world and hadn't quite figured out how to stop being that. Coming into a bend on the Guildford bypass, Hawthorn's Jaguar lost traction on the wet surface. It clipped a bollard dividing the two carriageways, brushed the back of an oncoming lorry, crossed the road, and struck a tree. He was killed instantly. Reigning world champion, 3 months retired, 29 years old, dead on an ordinary road he'd driven 100 times before. In weather that wouldn't have troubled most drivers half as experienced as he was. There's no barrier that would have saved him, and no piece of safety equipment from that era that applied to a road car on a public bypass. This one wasn't a circuit failing a driver. It was something closer to a man who had spent his whole adult life needing speed to feel normal, discovering that retirement hadn't actually taken that need away. There was no race left to continue. He'd already retired from all of them. 3 drivers. 1 team. 7 months. Musso in July. Collins in August. Lewis-Evans in October. In the same race weekend, Hawthorne won the title that was supposed to be the highlight of his career. Hawthorne himself in January, on a road, in a car that had nothing to do with racing at all. Formula One in 1958 didn't lack for people who understood the danger. Every one of these men knew exactly what they were risking every time they got in the car. What the sport lacked wasn't awareness. It was anything resembling a system built to survive the mistakes that awareness couldn't prevent. Ditches lined circuits that cars were now fast enough to launch off of. Barriers were straw bales and grass banks. There were no seatbelts, no roll structures worth the name. Nothing between a driver's skull and whatever he happened to hit. None of that changed because of what happened to Ferrari's drivers in 1958. It would take another decade and a lot more names before circuits started building real barriers and cars started building real cockpits around the people inside them. Luigi Musso died July 6, 1958. Peter Collins died August 3, 1958. Stuart Lewis-Evans died October 25, 1958. Mike Hawthorn, the only one of the 4 who actually became champion, died January 22, 1959. 6 weeks after the season that killed the other 3 had finally officially ended. None of them raced against each other by accident. Ferrari built a team that rewarded exactly the kind of risk that killed 2 of its own drivers in a single month and didn't have to answer for it, because in 1958 nobody was asking that question yet. The championship is still decided. It just cost 4 men their lives to get there, 3 of them before the trophy was even handed out.